دوستان، هموطنان عزیز، خوش آمدید به یه اپیزود دیگه. گفتم که شاید دیگه از آرتیست همیشگی یکم خسته باشید. یکی از دوستان بسیار خوبم رو توی زمینه شراب بیارم که خیلی هم آشنایی بیشتر با فرهنگ ما داره و ما هم اتفاقا با فرهنگ آنا خیلی بیشتر آشنا هستیم. آنا از گرجستان هستش اصلیتش و میشه گفت واقعا یکی از قدیمی ترین، اگه نه حتی خودشون باورن که کاملا و یک تایی قدیمی ترین جای دنیا هستش که شراب اونجا به عمل میاد و گفتم این اپیزود بهتون کمک خواهد کرد. چرا؟ چون جوری که شرابا رو تو گرجستان درست میکنن خیلی شباهت داره به جوری که هموطنان عزیز ما تو کشور خودمون بدون تکنولوژی‌های مختلف، بدون مدرنیتی چجوری درست میکنن. چیه که شرابای گرجستان رو توی کل کره زمین جدا نگه می‌داره و یکتا هستش و واقعا میشه گفتش هیچ جایی نیستش که همچین شرابی درست کنه؟ چیه و چه دلیلیه، چه جوریه؟ Anna, welcome. Nice to have
you. Thank you for having me.
Good one. So I was basically telling our guests that, Georgia is by far one of the most ancient places in the world where winemaking has been done and perfected forever, but at the same time the way that you guys go about winemaking could very well be said that is different than almost anywhere else. And even though there is a lot of awareness with modern ways of making wine, how you've stuck to the tradition, how are these traditions and what makes Georgian wine world-renowned and special?
No, thank you. Yeah, what really sets them apart, the first would be the tradition and the history of Georgian winemaking. The second would be the people and the culture, and then also as well the terroir and the actual grape varieties of Georgia. So going to history, archaeologists, they found winemaking, traces of winemaking that dated back 8,000 years. So that's where they were able to find their title, their worldwide title of the cradle and the birthplace of wine. But that's not the only title I would say that they have. They've also have an origin of a very trendy, recently trending
old is
style.
Old is gold, going back to what was long time ago a practice and now it's becoming fashionable again.
Yeah. And the style of winemaking is what Georgians have been doing for thousands of years, which is making white wine like a red wine. So we call it skin contact, we call it orange, but
amber.
Georgians like to call it amber, trying to spread that throughout there. But they do this for many reasons, but typically, as you were talking before, is about tannins and the beneficial qualities that tannins have, both to making wine and to your health. And so Georgians believe that it has anti-cancerous properties, it's good for bad cholesterol and good for blood flow and things like that. Not only as well as the antioxidant properties.
Yeah, the polyphenols, or in particular resveratrol, is the compound for the more scientific-minded viewers amongst us if they want to Google it and look into it. So there's definitely truth to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they really gained a hallmark title there as well for being the origin of amber wines. And another origin that they have is Qvevri winemaking. So worldwide people are also calling it amphora, and in Farsi are calling it
khomre.
Khomre.
Because if you're not using, you don't have the proper type of trees to make barrels of, and it can be expensive and you don't get to be able to use it as often as you like to. And of course we talked about oxygen being a friend or a foe. A little bit of it is needed, a lot of it obviously no good. And these special khomres, terracotta vessels, which Anna will touch on, is quite different. The shape itself promotes the movement of wine inside, and a lot more that will be for her to tell us.
And it's also quite used. Georgian wines are very natural, they're very raw, they're very unfiltered. And a way of helping that process is in burying these clay vessels in order to not only be closer to the mother nature, but also to have a temperature control. So it's also very much for winemaking techniques as well. And that's why many very prominent winemakers around the world in Italy and France really took after Georgian winemaking techniques, because it's very simple and it's brought down to just what is necessary and nothing more to it.
Less is more.
Yeah, less is more. Simple is key. So the second aspect that I want to talk about that sets Georgian wine and Georgia apart from other winemaking regions is the terroir and the grape varieties. So there's over 525 indigenous grape varieties to Georgia. And it's a small country, so it's very expansive. And through the Soviet era, a lot of these grape varieties went missing or were lost or were uprooted to kind of make way for other varieties. So
more popular ones.
But the very unique factor of these indigenous varieties is many people believe that they are the origin of the other European varieties that have spread across the world, you know, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay and all of them. And they come from Saperavi, which is a very common red variety, and Cacciatelli, which is a common white variety. And they have very unique characteristics and are said to be the kind of king and queen of grape varieties. And terroir as well, there's this huge difference when you go for a couple hours or a couple kilometers. There's a huge difference in terroir, in elevation, in soil, in climate, and it really adds to it. And you can also see the very different styles that are made in the western part or in the eastern part that are very ancient and traditional to those regions and to those grape varieties that suit that region.
And this is very important to note because we may assume that, you know, pockets of dirt all over the world are going to be vastly different from one another if you go 5 minutes that way, 10 minutes that way, but that may not necessarily be the case. In fact, there are quite a bit of wine regions that their soils are extremely uniform from north to south, from east to west. So that does not become a big deciding factor in the uniqueness of the wines. But Georgia is indeed scientifically proven, is blessed to have that major diversity to be able to put out wines that each has that, you know, slight nuance of where it's grown and how it's grown.
Absolutely, yeah. Going to something a little bit more poetic, I will say the real and honest difference of Georgian wine that made me fall in love with it as well and made me start my business and import it to Canada to share it is the people and the culture that really set Georgia apart, and it shows up in your wine glass. It absolutely does. The people, you know, they grew up, a majority of the people grew up making wine in their basement. They needed to make it because of the huge feasts and the hospitality that is quite common in Georgia. And wine is flowing always on the table. There's toasts to make to life. There's love to toast to, you know, there's history, there's many things to toast to in life, appreciation, and it's very common.
You can say some of those in the native Georgian language and what they mean. Like, for example, in Farsi, for us, when we want to say cheers, we say besalamati, which means to your health and happiness. To your health, not happiness, to your health.
Georgian, we say gaumajos, and that means to victory. And sometimes it's more personal, to your victory or to ours. But it really, it's a toast to victory and
any
together.
Other common ones too, or
no? I would say that's the main one.
Victory.
Victory, but it has many different meanings. So people are a huge part of the winemaking. It's in their blood, and it's also a part of their culture. And I would say on the culture, religion ties into this as well, where the beautiful part of Georgian wine is that it's been continuous through occupation, through war, through tougher times. They were able to continue making wine, and that we can attribute that to the priests and of the Eastern Orthodox churches that continuously made the wine and kept it going. And not many regions are able to have that. You know, there was many years where you had to keep it or stop it. So Georgia we can say thank you to the priests that have been able to keep it continuous, and it's really embodied in the culture of Georgia, and you can see it anywhere. And one thing I really love about the culture aspect is that there's many legends and tales that go into the philosophy of winemaking in Georgia. And one that really sticks out to me is going back to the qvevris, these egg-shaped fermentation and aging vessels that they bury. They believe that you when you pick the grapes and you're making wine, you put it into this egg-shaped qvevri that is buried in the earth, and you're thinking, I'm going to return the grapes to its mother, and it's going to birth wine. And in that way, what really touches me, and you can taste it in the Georgian wine, is that this wine is alive. It's simple, it's what it needs to be. It creates complex layers because it's been made in a simple way, and it's alive. It's raw, it's unfiltered, and it
unfined,
really,
unfiltered,
exactly,
unfiddled with, no commercial
no
yeast,
additives, no nothing, and nothing also taken away. So we could go into a bit more about how the qvevri is able to help that, but that's
I think it will be interesting for the viewers to learn a little bit more about so the grapes are picked, what is a typical modern winemaker approach to it. Let's take the white grapes for example. So what is a typical modern winemaker in the Western world is doing with those grapes versus if those grapes, much like a chef, two different chefs being handed a piece of meat, how are they going to treat it differently? So it would be nice to see what the Georgians do, and for fellow Persians, it's going to be important to take note because their methods are so primitive and simple and beautiful. You can really apply quite a bit of that in your own home winemaking, since that's in exile right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to keep in mind, though, is just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. No. And we often connotate those things together, but what's important is it takes a lot of work and a lot of knowledge, and when you have it, it is simple. That's much like life. And typically, let's say a Pinot Gris or a Pinot Grigio, which is quite similar to Rkatsiteli, which is the common white grape variety in Georgia. Rkatsiteli is made with skin contact quite often, and so they keep all the stems, they keep all the pips, they keep all the skins together as they ferment the wine, as they age the wine, up to 6-7 months even. So it creates this beautiful amber color that we were talking about before, and these characteristics develop of honey and dried apricot and tarragon and clove and walnut, and it's layered in that way. For Georgia, everything is hands-on. There's no machines involved. There's no barrels involved. It's very hands-on. You have to be very careful about when to pick to keep acidity levels high in order to preserve a wine a little bit longer, keep its freshness. There's a lot more involved in the actual hand part of it, I would say. And so the philosophy as well in the vineyard is that, we're letting weeds grow. We're letting them, because they all add to the winemaking process, and they all add to the vine. They help the vine survive instead of and communicate. You were saying earlier.
Basically working with forces of life, not forces of death.
Exactly.
Again, a commercially winded producer who is making wine as a commodity, has to do things rather differently. They have pests, kill it. Weed, herbicide. Fungus, fungicide. They're just trying to get rid of things. And the finished wines are very clean and are very correct, but they're very much made in that way. And while they may smell good and taste good, but there's just something somehow missing behind it. It doesn't have a soul.
This is what I mean by a live wine,
yes.
Right? It's really, in my eyes, really pays homage to what they're trying to do with wine and what they believe behind wine. It's less so for profit. It's less so for marketing aspect of what the typical consumer wants to bring. Yeah, we're putting this on the table for our family and for our friends, and hopefully you'll like it. So. Yeah, and an example of some of the additives that are used that are not used in natural winemaking or unfiltered and raw winemaking is tannins, for example. So often you'll have tannins that you'll find added tannins in
from the
your
barrels
typical
itself.
From wood, from oak, from other more premium style wood, and you add 3 different types, finishing, specializing, better than I do about these tannins, but they are often have heavy metals in them like lead and mercury and arsenic. So that ends up in your wine, just like what you're spraying or to kill those weeds, that ends up in your wine. Of course, a small amount, but that is where the difference is from a live and not a live wine in my eyes. And you can really taste it after after seeing the difference, my father, a huge supporter of my business, and we like to do this wine venture together. He always says, once I try Georgian wine, I can't go back. I can't try anything else now. It's all I can drink. So that's why we imported it. So for friends and family, and for the lovely restaurants around Vancouver, especially. So.
Maybe talk a little bit about the longevity of the wines through this process. Does it make the wines to be able to be more age-worthy? And what happens to a typical Georgian wine in its youth or as the years go by in terms of the aromas and the flavors and the textures?
Yeah, we can talk about white wine, I think, more specifically because it has such a significance to Georgia, but the red is very similar as well. But with a white wine, the less skin contact you have, the clearer it'll be, the more primary characteristics that you'll see. The longer you age it, in a Qvevri especially, it develops this rounded character. The longer with the skins, it develops these layers that I was talking about before, where you have honey and you have this dried apricot, just very earthy, and it brings you it grounds you a bit. And so with aging also, you get a bit of oxidation through the clay vessel itself, and just through the whole process of having your wine buried. So it's able to age a bit longer, I would say, and really, really beautifully too. It rounds out because with extended skin contact, you get a lot more structure. You get a very bold boy, you get lots of tannins, lots of acidity, and it's slowly through time, it's able to balance out and get very round and beautiful. There's 3 king grape varieties of Imereti, of the large western winemaking region, and Tsitska, Tsolikauri, and Krahuna. And there, the typical winemaking style is 3 months skin contact and not 6 months like in the East, and only 30% skin. So you're getting a lot more of a lemon,
a gateway to Georgian wine.
And that I've been saying, it's more approachable for people that have not, don't want to, what did you say earlier, get smacked across the face right off the bat. So you get a lot more of a youthful, happy, vibrant kind of aspect, but it's layered from Qvevri, and from that as a vessel, it's layered by this earthiness, and real earthiness. So it's like a ground floor that you get. It's really, really lovely because then you get these layers as well, but it has a lot of minerality to it that I personally die for in a wine. So the reds as well in the Western region, they're lighter and very, very vibrant, very acidic and happy.
What has been some of the oldest Georgian wines you've tried? How many years, and what was different about them texturally, aromatically?
I think the oldest one was a 2006, was at a Katsateli. And it, again, like I explained, it had rounded out a lot because when you try after like 1 year of fermenting and aging, and after you try it, it does have a very bold characteristic.
Angular, a little some sharpness,
maybe
edgy.
Not, exactly, edgy, that's a great way of putting it. So I would say since 2006, right? It had, I think this was a couple of years ago though, but it had really rounded out and it had calmed down, and the more tertiary characteristics had come out, and the more kind of caramel walnut instead of honey walnut, I would say.
It's a very desired aromatic profile that the Portuguese find in one of their most beloved wines called Madeira. They call that note rancio, or essentially smells like grilled nuts with like some honey coating around
vanilla or caramel.
مثل سوهان خودمون سوهان عسلی. And I have one more question I've always been curious about. You look at the old world and places that wine has been made for thousands of years, and you look at their food and you look at the wine. What would you say, some of the most successful food and wine pairings or classical dishes and wines of Georgia that people may be able to look up recipes or replicate for themselves at home?
Yeah, well, if you're replicating at home, call me, because I will like to be there, first of all. So that's the first mandatory recipe ingredient or instruction, I guess. But I would say, again, on a personal basis, There's one particular Georgian dish that I collapse for. It's called badrijani, and it has a very what's the word, signature ingredients to Georgia, and it's a roasted eggplant slices that are in a roll with this walnut pomegranate full of garlic stuffing, and I would say that has a beautiful jaw-dropping pairing to rakatsateli and any amber wine, really, because it has such a spiced and homey aspect to it, and with the pomegranates it has these pops of freshness, and then with rakatsateli you get, you know, this again, this bold structured wine that's been, you know, spent underground for 6 to 8 months, and so you're getting this beautiful tarragon and again this more herbaceous side of things, and then with the acidity it really balances it out with the garlic, so it has this dance that's really
tarragon
lovely.
Is quite common in
Quite
Georgian
common,
food.
yeah.
It's like basil to the Italians.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like cilantro
it's in many
to Vietnamese.
dishes. It's in many dishes. Walnut, I would say, walnut, garlic, tarragon, signature across the board. But an amber wine is able to pair with anything because it has the structure and the boldness of a red wine, but it has all these beautiful characteristics of a white wine. So you're getting the best of both worlds with this, and then that way you're able to taste all these different flavors and kind of cleanse your palate and be able to find these new flavors, like with badrijani that I was talking about, where they're dancing together. And so you're able to get all of this from it, and that's a huge reason why they drink these jars of amber
looking
wine.
into the etymology of it. You say badrijani, we say bademjan, you know, for eggplant. So it sounds awfully
really?
similar. So
yeah, aubergine,
you gotta look into it more.
We should.
And then maybe
little infusion.
The last thing I had in mind, since a lot of our viewers are back home in Iran, and many have already been to Georgia and to Tbilisi and other places, but maybe you can touch on the name and rough travel area time from Tbilisi to the various wine regions in Georgia, so people can go there in person and enjoy it.
Yeah, again, call me. Call me before you go. But I will go towards the suppliers and the beautiful winemakers I have the privilege of having in my portfolio in Canada here. And they are very hospitable. That's what Georgians are known for. So if you are ever interested, you can always get in contact with me and we can set up a little wine tour because they'd be happy to. But I would say to start, if you want something more approachable, go to the western side. You know, if you're flying into Batumi, which is right on the Black Sea, where there's kiwis growing and there's birds and there's tropical and it's all beautiful. And then you head a little bit higher up in the mountains and it gets a little bit moister and these beautiful landscapes you find, and then you can find all these wineries everywhere in Imereti, and then if you go more center, more towards Tbilisi, on the way you can enter Kartli region, which is known for their sparkling wine, which is really fun, and they kind of draw out east and west of Georgia and bring in many styles there, which is really fun. The south is a part that's slowly coming up with their winemaking, and so there's a lot to kind of discover there, but I wouldn't say it's completely structured yet. And then you head to the east, and that's where I would say a good 70% of the winemaking is called Kakheti, and one of my beautiful suppliers is there, a couple of them, but most notable, they're building a village to mimic 8,000 years ago. And they're building up a village they have the town center with the clock, and they have the royal quarters and the peasants' quarters, and they have all of this to kind of mimic, and it's going to be a hotel. And so that's one place to really keep in mind, because they're making beautiful wine and they're drawing people in, and that's their goal. So that's in Kakheti, and so there's many beautiful things happening there. I would definitely take a look around there, but I'm one to always want to give out my time if you're ever interested. So that's something, just shoot me an email. I'm always available, kind of thing.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and we'll find other wine guests with different backgrounds and different areas of specialty, and hopefully it will help you gain a fuller picture of the entire wine scene and culture and history that goes behind it, because a lot of people may think of wine as an alcoholic beverage, but that may just be the last thing on people's mind. It's very much where art and science or history and civility come together and get bottled. It may be just one of the most civilized things that human beings have done. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Anna.
you for having me.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.